section, we want to tell you about this. Remember I did say there's a process where you can do a settlement at probate. That's called a consolidation agreement at probate. So what that really means is all the heirs can come together and they can do a settlement. And it's a really good tool because you can exchange interests with each other. So in other words, you all come, all the heirs, and you sit down and you go through the inventory of the decedent, and you decide how you want to divvy it up among you. It can do it when there's no will, or even if there is a will, you can do it. Go ahead to the next part. The other thing that's really key with this is that you can bring land that you already have. Okay, say you already have all this, other trust land, and then you're involved in this probate as an heir. You can bring the land that you already have over here. Maybe you have some land that your brother really wanted, but you got it. You can bring that in and say, okay, if you give me that piece, I have this land from this I got it before this probate. I'm going to put it on the table and let's do an exchange. It sounds crazy, but it's actually a very workable tool. And we did get a grant from BIA some years back, and we helped some families to test this out to see if it would work. And these are families that were really mad at each other, couldn't get along, in dispute. We'd put them in separate rooms, and then we'd go back and forth and try to see if we could actually reach an agreement on how to resolve this. We did 33 of them, very contentious families that were recommended by the BIA to say, maybe you can see if you can get these people to, reach some agreement. So that's a tool. No value needed when you exchange interests, which is very good. So it's not going to cost you an appraisal. It's not going to cost you a survey. So those are some benefits to trying to do that. The other thing is once you reach that agreement and it's all written up, you just turn it into the probate judge and they sign it, and it's the order. It becomes the order, and then the land is divided up by the agreement. Yes? No, not in this case. In this case, you can all agree on however you want to do it. Maybe some of the older people want to leave big shares to the younger people. Or maybe, whoever the heirs are, you can all decide how you want to distribute it. And it doesn't have to be an equal value exchange. Yeah. Equal value is just so hard. Equal value exchanges. And we will talk quickly about exchanges. Okay. Okay. Now we wanted to, I guess real quick, we have a slide in here on tribal probate codes. Tribal probate codes, the tribe has the authority to change some of these laws that we've talked about. They can change on that single heir rule. You know how the brothers and sisters are left out and the parents? They could actually put those, the siblings and the parents in to keep the land in the family. They can do that. They can include adopted out children if they want to make sure that adopted out child inherits from the biological parent. They can do that. There's a lot of leeway in the tribal probate code. So I understand that the tribe did do a probate code, but Russ told us that it was rejected. We thought we'd all take another look at it and see if there's things that we can revise. So, okay, let's talk about trust land transactions. Okay, there's a lot of real basic information in this book on trust land transactions. We're talking about leases, and real quick, when we get to leases, let me just give you a little bit of background. So when the BIA, you all know the BIA actually originated from a whole different department. Do you know what department the BIA came from? War.
You already got a cup.
So originally, Indian Affairs were under the War Department. They were under the War Department. That's where it all started in managing Indian Affairs. And then later, we became the BIA. Remember, though, that the BIA was never set up to be a real estate agency. It was never set up to be handling all this real estate. The real estate happened because of the allotment and managing all of these allotted tracts. That's where that came from. You know, it wasn't, there wasn't an intent to have the BIA do all this leasing. And so, and then that leasing activity started to prevent trespass. That's really where it all started, because we had free-range cattlemen that were going crazy in Indian country in the early part of the 1900s. You had a lot of all this Indian land out here, not too many Indians, and you had Indians who had allotments, but they really weren't able to use them. They didn't have them fenced. So what did that attract? That attracted a lot of free-range cattle people that ran through all of our western reservations. And they were in trespass all over. And so that's a real generalization, but I know on the Crow Reservation, it is very true. We had some very rich grass in certain areas, and boy, these free-range cattlemen came in and they just basically took over a lot of those lands. So the government really didn't have a choice but to go out and say, you know what, if they're going to start coming in and using these lands this way, we may as well lease them out so that the landowners and the tribe could collect some money off of it. So it wasn't an intention for the BIA to do leasing. It was something they kind of fell into and had to do to protect. So there's lots of complaints and lots of issues and problems as leasing has evolved over the years on how to manage it. So the authority for leases is right here. This is a newer authority. There's old authority that says that they manage all trust transactions. This authority says any restricted Indian land, that's trust land, may be leased by the Indian owners with approval of the secretary. So it says you're leasing the land, but actually they're the ones that manage and administer that. When someone is out on the land, if they're going to use it or take some possession of it, they have to have a lease. The consent of the landowners is required. The BIA will help landowners who want to lease out their land through negotiations. However, here on your reservation, most of these lands are in range units. And the BIA advertises those range units, and you know that's the practice that you have for leasing. Other reservations, you can do a landowner negotiated lease. At Crow, I guess that's what we've done for many years. We have no range units. So we do our own negotiations, and the BIA then, actually, some of those leases, the BIA doesn't even have to approve, but that's a whole different circumstance. Here you're in the range units, yeah. Okay, all right, let's skip over permits. And let's go to one big issue at slide 72. How do you figure out what fair market value is when you're doing leasing, even when you're getting a range unit? That's slide 72. Fair annual rental is determined in two ways. The first is by competitive bidding, or it's by an appraisal or evaluation method prepared pursuant to use cap. So in other words, you know, they do come out and they do those range unit assessments and they determine what fair market would be, and that's what they assess for the range unit, and then competitive bidding. Those are the two ways that you determine fair market value. Yesterday we had a lot of questions about, well, can't the tribe set a minimum? We had one participant who was real upset that he said land off the reservation, the values are so high. People leases, and had some examples and said, and on the reservation we only get this much, and how come, you know, we don't have big minimums that were set? Well, it's hard to set a minimum, and actually the superintendent was there, and she's on actually listening. It's hard to set minimums because if you set a minimum, and you have an operator out there, and they have to meet that minimum, they might determine that they're not going to be able to afford the lease and the operations with that minimum, and so they won't bid. And they said there's a large list of idle tracts of land where no one's leasing them when they have a minimum, because it's expensive or hard for operators to meet it. I'm not saying whether that's, I don't want to offer an opinion on that. However, I will say, when you set a minimum, though, sometimes you end up having no bid at all on land. And if you have no bid, who takes the hit? If you have no bid on that range unit, who takes the loss? The landowner and the tribe. So the revenue isn't generated. So, that's why you have open and competitive bidding, and then that way you do have a bid, at least it brings in some money. And that's a difficulty, but that's Indian reservation lands. That's kind of that's what happens across the board.
Part of it too is because they're only allowed to lease to non-members if no tribal organization wants to lease it, or a tribal member is able to lease it. And if it's too high that tribal members aren't able to afford it, then that would open it up to non-tribal members leasing it. So I hope they keep it low in the hopes that they'd have more native ranchers.
So
I don't know if that's considered.
we do have an Indian preference in our allocation process. I wish Russ were here. But we do, there is a preference, but yes. So there is an attempt by the tribe to do that. But you're right. You run the risk, though, of always being outbid by, having tribal members outbid, which then results in tribal members not really having first benefit to use it. Yes?
With the BIA doing the estimate for the rate, and this is like for, as an example, the pasture leases. We have mostly range units, but we also have pasture leases and farm leases. And one of the problems that they have is that they use data that comes from the state and I guess USDA to
NRCS.
NRCS, right? And the fee patent land, a lot of it is different than tribal land, especially the pasture leases.
Different
Most of
path.
your pasture leases are not fenced out. Most of your pasture leases do not have water on them, okay? Whereas the data they're collecting is from land that's fenced out, that has water on it. A lot of times the owner of the land, the rate that they claim that they're receiving, they're pasturing the cattle, they're taking care of the cattle, you know what I'm saying? It isn't like they're just leasing it, they're, you know what I mean? And they use that data as well as, it's a mixture of data that they use. So it's not real accurate. In fact, it's inaccurate, you know what I mean, in my
Not
opinion.
apples to apples.
And I've talked about this for years and years with the land committee. Anyway, that's a major problem, is that the information they use to set the rates for pasture leases is flawed. It's not real accurate. And farm leases, I don't know, there's not too many tribal members that are farmers. And so that's a different deal there. I don't know, I'm not a farmer either, but anyway. And in farming, you don't have to have water, you don't have to have fences and everything else. It's probably more accurate, the data that they collect. But anyway, I wanted to mention that.
So we are going to try to take back some concepts. Even we've had discussion in the last 2 days of things that, we want to have some collaboration with the BIA on some of the issues that have been raised. So that would be one of them, is that, you feel like the way they value the lands doesn't take into account some of the things that are not found on lands that they're using in that valuation.
And are you gonna talk about like the management, the trust responsibility of the BIA to manage the land, protect the land, and lease the land?
Yeah, you know, and after you talked about that, so the BIA, and I'm not defending, when you sue the BIA, or when you want to establish that the BIA has a duty to do something, there usually has to be a statute that says the United States will do this and such, okay? And then that's how Cabell was brought. There was a statute that said you will do an accounting of the IIM account. And that's what they sued under. There was a statute. When it comes to, so the BIA does do the leases, but the BIA will always go back. And we have a retired BIA guy that sometimes trains with us. And it's really funny because we disagree with him a lot during this training. So sometimes it's best we leave him home. But anyway, he will always say all the BIA's responsibility to do is conservation and protection, which is really broad. But that's actually what is in the law and regulations, is conservation and protection. How far does that go? That's not real clear.
Right, the reason I brought that up is that back in the 70s and even the early 80s, most of the BIA superintendents, that's what they said. You know, we're here to manage the land, protect the land, you know what I mean, and lease the land as well, you know what I mean. And now you don't hear that from the superintendents, you know, in the last, 10, 15 years, you don't hear them talking that way.
So, but I also think you have to think about kind of a lot of the stuff that we've talked about today. You know, we've talked about how far do you really want the BIA to go if you're the tribe on managing these lands on this reservation? They're trying to empower the tribe, and the tribe develops ordinances, and the tribe is looking at exercising their sovereign authority in some of these areas. And you do have that rub with the Bureau. You know, you have to find that balance.
Just like, as an example, Fish and Wildlife, okay? The tribe, our tribe started contracting the Fish and Wildlife responsibilities from the BIA, not sure when it was, 20 years ago. And anyway, so, you know, basically the BIA has a responsibility to manage wildlife on the reservation, right? And protect wildlife on the reservation. So the tribe contracts that responsibility. So they have to have a wildlife biologist, they have to have a fish and wildlife code, you know, on and on. That's required, you know, in the contract, you know. And I think other tribes do the same thing. And that's what I'm talking about, is that, you know, it's not just fish and wildlife, though. You know, to me, the BIA has a responsibility to protect sacred sites, historical sites, you know, wetlands. I mean, on and on and on. And yet, it's not doing it. It's not happening. You know what I mean? And that's my concern. It hasn't been happening almost like forever. You know what I mean? Especially on Pine Ridge. You know, it's you know, the BIA leases land, yeah, right. But as far as the management basically comes down to the person that's leasing the land. You know, and anyway, I thought I'd share that with you.
I mean, I understand there's really a lot of frustration, and I think there's going to be a whole lot more. Look at what the budget cuts are. I mean, the budget cuts that are proposed for these governmental services are huge. We've already lost a lot of lease compliance techs. We've lost a lot of the, you know, there's a lot of services that may have been in place in the 80s, in the 70s, that are no longer there. And
Just
so,
like in primary agency here, land operations, I was told before like in 1970, 71, 72, just in land operations office, they had about 10 people working there.
yep,
And a lot of these people were college-educated professionals with degrees in range management and agriculture. Well, now, what is there, two? I think, I don't know.
Yeah.
And the realty office is the same way. You know, it's understaffed, and our treasurer just posted a comment about how, you know, they had a meeting in DC recently about, you know, what do they call it,
self-governance.
and anyway, she's saying we shouldn't do that. We shouldn't try to contract these from the BIA because they're not funded at 100%. They're funded, you know, 15% or 20%.
Right.
And so I shared that all over, you know, because that's the truth. That's the truth. You know, it's not good. But anyway, I thought I'd share that with you.
Okay,
Some
well,
comments.
thank you. Thank you for that. Let's talk about range units, because I think that, real quickly, go all the way to slide 81. Okay, so on slide 81, this is the whole process, real general process on how range units are established. So first of all, the Secretary of Interior is authorized to promulgate rules and regulations regarding range units, and that is right in the United States Code, so it's a statute, it's law. And the act authorized the development of rules and regulations to, number one, restrict livestock, the number of livestock on the range units to a carrying capacity. And then number two, to protect the range from deterioration, soil erosion, and also to assure full utilization of the range and like purposes. So then down below the next slide, it says, the range units created by the Secretary consulting with the Indian landowners of range lands by designating the range units. That was probably done many, many years ago when these range units were created and established. And then the grazing capacity, it's based upon the summation of each parcel's productivity and the seasons of use. That was probably established also many years ago and continued on. And then the term of a grazing permit usually will not exceed 10 years unless there is a substantial investment. No good definition of that, what a substantial investment is. And you were just talking to me at break on that. You know, it's real hard if you can only have a short period of time for someone to invest a lot in the range unit. And does that investment stay with the range unit once you don't have it anymore, like all the fence, all the water tanks, you know, what else, all that equipment that you might do. So there's a lot of questions about that part of it. Okay, then rental rates, go to the next slide. Rental rates, so rental rates for 100% tribal lands, the tribe establishes the grazing rental rate. For individually owned land, but landowners do have to receive fair market value. And that's where that estimate comes in. Because, and this is also a cabal issue. It is a cabal issue. Because after cabal, the BIA is very nervous about being sued if there is anything that would be considered a breach of their duty to the beneficiary, to the landowner. And so they have been very strict about appraising these range unit, doing those range unit appraisals and making sure those prices are considered fair market value. Possibly, based on what you said, maybe that's overkill, but right now that's sort of the position, is to make sure they're protecting that Indian landowner. So the range unit prices, I've seen them all over go way up after cabal, because they're nervous about liability and litigation. So that's part of it. Okay, let's go on to let's see, rental rate adjustments, that's what they're called. BIA will do that. Use PAP appraisal, and the whole thing is to ensure that the individual landowners are getting fair annual rental. They're supposed to provide notice of the adjustment 60 days prior to the anniversary date. So they're gonna let you know if your range unit went up in price, and that can happen. Okay, let's go to removal of land from a grazing permit. Okay, and that's at slide 87. There's several ways you can remove land from a range unit if you're a landowner. One is you can apply for a fee patent. You may not want to do that, but you can do that. If you apply for a fee patent on your land, then that removes it from the range unit. The other thing you can do is the BIA can remove that land from the range unit if there's a request from the landowners. So, and this doesn't have it in here, so you can write it down. There are some criteria that they will look at when you make a request to remove your land from a range unit. They have to look at the impact on the entire range unit. So if you have the only source of water on your land, on that entire range unit, they're probably not going to let you do it. I mean, it'll be a fight. Because it'll decrease the value of the entire range unit. But what you can do is you can ask them to revise the range unit to exclude your land or find alternate water. It's a negotiation. You can go in and work with them on that. And I have done that. I've represented people at Blackfeet who wanted to get their land out of a range unit or change the range unit boundaries. You can do that. The other thing you have to do is if you're right in the middle of the range unit and you want to take your land out of that range unit, they might say, okay, then if you want to do that, you fence your land. You fence it. Yeah, that's a big detriment. I mean, that's a big deterrent when you are told, well, we'll let you take your land out of the range unit, but go ahead and fence it. The other thing is access. They're going to look at access. If your land includes a real, the most, I guess the access to get to the rest of it, or is the best road to get to the rest of the range unit, that's also something they'll look at. Access, like access, yeah, getting in and out of the range unit. So if you're going to block access to the range unit when you take out your land, that will be an issue. And that can be negotiated. You can talk about that. You can figure out it right away. There's some things you can do. Yeah, so if you really want to do it, I really think it's worth talking to the Bureau and saying, how do I do this? Here's why I want to do it, and it's a negotiation.
It also won't be immediate. The timing of when the lease is up is going to affect when you'll be able to take it out. And that's said in there. So if they approve it, they have to give notice, and then it's effective the next anniversary date. Like, so when the lease is up, then that's when that you being taken out of the range unit becomes effective. Unless, and like it says, unless you're within 180 days of the anniversary date, and then it has that special date. So the timing also, there's special timing.
Okay, so with that, we do have quite a bit of material in here that we're not going to get through. However, and we're all tired, I know. And we're tired, aren't we? But we do have some basic slides on rights-of-ways, on how rights-of-ways are done, and how the consent works for a right-of-way, so that's available for you in there. We do also go all the way to slide 98, and that's to do exchanges, if you want to do land exchanges. Land exchanges are hard. They are a little bit hard, but this is the CFR provision on land exchanges and some real general concepts of what you have to do. So like you two want to exchange lands with each other, there's a way to do that. I do understand from the BIA that they are doing land exchanges. So this would be like if you have a whole bunch of individual or small interests all over, you could pull them all together and go in and exchange with the tribe for a tract that you could use. And the BIA said they are actually processing these. They have a procedure. Superintendent Duville was at the meeting yesterday and said, yes, we are processing land exchanges. We have that process ongoing. So this is general information. This is the CFR provision. You do have to have sort of a equal value. When we're talking equal value too, I want you to think about equal value in terms other than equal acreage. Just because you have 40 acres and you have 40 acres, they're not necessarily going to be of equal value. And part of that is because maybe yours has water. Maybe yours is real hilly and you can't really use it. Maybe yours has a lot of erosion, or whatever that might be. So when you're looking at equal value, it's not acre for acre, it's value for value. But you can do those exchanges, and so that's there. We already talked about gift deeds, how you can do gift deeds. Yes, and so now I think what would be helpful is to go to slide 106. You want to go to that first?
Yeah, somebody wanted to.
Yeah, let's do that first then.
Somebody on the chat wanted to know about this, how to read a.
Okay, so what slide are you on?
Do we want to start at 105 or?
Okay, let's start at slide 105. We're just going to tell you how to read your TSR, your inventory. We just want to give you that information. Okay, so we are going to slide 104. Okay, so first of all, you might have had before, you might have had an ID number, an Indian ID number, and that might have been different than your IIM account number a long time ago. And you really should tattoo all these numbers on your arm. No, I'm just kidding. However, now you only have one number. You have one number. That's the policy of the U.S. is you're supposed to have one number. Although I think there's an issue with that. Okay, so you will have one ID number. So this is the format of your ID, your Indian ID, your IIM account number. They're the same. It's a 10-digit number. And the first three letters are the tribe code, where the tribe is. And yesterday we heard that was, is it 305?
I was going to have them say if they knew, but oh well.
Do you know? Who knows what the Indian ID code is here? Who knows? Do you know, what are the first three numbers of your IIM account?
Or what about tribal?
Well, their enrollment number may be different. I don't know. Okay, so our ID number, if you own land, my ID number, because I'm enrolled at Crow, starts with 202. So every Crow is a 202. What is ours? Huh? 305. He's going to look it up. 315? Okay, so that means everybody that has an IIM or Indian ID number that starts with 315, they're enrolled Oglala Sioux. Okay, so we have to give you a cup because you answered the question. Okay, all right, so that's the first three numbers, and then the next digit, the next symbol is a digit, and that's known as the class code. And that means whether you're unallotted or you're allotted. There's probably no allotted people alive. Most of those allottees are dead. So we now have enrollment numbers that have a U. So you are a 315U. All of that would mean that you are Oglala Sioux tribe, unallotted Indian, and then the last are just the 6 numbers that they give you for the ID. Okay. All right, let's go next to the next slide. So that class code, that allotted, A means an original allottee, and my grandma was an original allottee. So her enrollment had an A. And then U is you're enrolled, but you didn't receive an original allotment. You can be an heir. And then N is a non-enrolled lineal descendant. So if you have descendants and they're not enrolled, but they're holding trust land, because they can hold 2 generations down. Remember, we talked about that. Then they have a N. N means they're a non-enrolled lineal descendant. A B, all these non-Indian life estate holders, they actually get a number. They get an ID number, and their number or their letter is B. And then you get an L, and that's an Indian life estate holder. So I'm confused because I think you could be an enrolled Indian and you could still be a life estate holder, and you're only supposed to have one number. So I'm not sure how they're doing that.
I think you'd get the U. I think these would be for like those APRA Indians who are just life estate holders, right?
Maybe. I don't know. But what if you give me a life estate?
Well, APRA.
It says an Indian life estate. Maybe it's an APRA Indian who's not enrolled anywhere. I don't know. We're not sure what that means.
Because there are those APRA Indians.
Yeah. Let's just make something up here.
So somebody on the chat wanted to know, like, in reading this, to talk about like what those different numbers mean.
So that's what they are. This explains what those numbers are that are on your inventory, or if you get a TSR, that's what they are. Remember, all of this information is held in, there's now a new title system. There's a national title system, and it's called the Trust Asset and Accounting Management System, TAMS. That was established also after the Cabell litigation, after the Cabell lawsuit was filed. They accused the United States of not doing a good accounting system for all of these trust lands. And one of the recommendations was to have a national title system. Everybody that owns Indian land is supposed to be in that system. And that's a TAM system. So really, ideally, you should be able to go to any BIA office, anywhere, and get an inventory of what you own. Because everybody who owns land, has an ID number, is in the system. And this is how you read it.
But they want you to talk about track, all those.
Okay, this thing here that you're looking at, I took this out of my buyback. Do you remember when you got your buyback and they had all those instructions and maps and all that kind of stuff? This came from that. We tried to find something online that did a better job of explaining all of that, but this is the best we could find. So when you get your inventory or a TSR, this is what it'll look like. So here you can see, right up here, you have the tract ID. The tract ID, that's the actual tract, and it has an ID number. So every tract has an ID number. So every tract of land, and then it has a tract name. That's the original name at allotment. So each of these tracts, when they were allotted, to whoever they were allotted to, they take the name of that. So I'll have in my inventory, we have the allotment of Steels on Camp, or we have the allotment of, Pretty Woman, or all of those original allottees. That's the name of the tract. And then there is the tract acreage. Now, don't you all get confused when you see that, because it says tract acreage. It's the total amount of acreage in that tract. It's not what you own, it's the size of the whole tract. And that one there is 320 acres. And then it has your share. Look at that little tiny share. It shows 0.00038194444. Okay. Yesterday, Superintendent DeVille said that when you want to figure out maybe what the percentage you own is, just take that and divide that little fraction into the tract acreage, and that will help. So that's how you can figure that out. So if you want to look at what your percentage of ownership is in the tract. What's that? Okay, and then there's a value of the tract. Now, this is only from the buyback. They only do this in the buyback. In a lot of your other reports that you get off of TAMS, they're very nervous to put a value, but this was in the buyback. As you know, they had a value for every one of the tracts. That over there is not in your inventory. This was in the buyback, and that showed when you circled and sold an interest in the buyback, how much of that money, or how much the scholarship contribution would be. And then here it showed that it was a appraisal that was done in 2013. All right. Now, the other thing is, see right where it says resource, and it shows minerals only. So when you look at your inventory, and it'll have this information, and okay, up here, tract ID, where it says 345M, that means it's just a mineral tract. It's only a mineral tract. And then if you look, so then also you can see where it has, actually these are all mineral tracts, I think. No, they're not. They don't have that. So the rest of these must be, okay, the rest of these, the last one says both mineral and surface, surface only, minerals only. So that's how you have to really study this thing to see, and you may have both estates, which are the surface estate and the mineral estate, and that should be a B. Yeah, this is actually from my buyback. Can you see that, Todd County? Yeah, this was one of the pages in my buyback. Yeah. Which one? Oh, okay. Down below, you do have state, county. So the state is South Dakota. The county is Todd County. There's the land description. Section 6, Township 35, Range 31 West, Meridian 6 Principal East. So that's your land description. So these are hard to read, they're hard to understand, but hopefully this is a little bit helpful. If you have your old buyback stuff laying around, look at it. It's in there. Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to say something about this because there was a few months ago, like the importance, like they tell you to like make sure you read these when you're doing your wills and stuff because you leave certain parts of your you leave your land to somebody. Well, anyway, I did a will a few months back and the lady thought she had all this land. She thought she had all this land, and then when we did the will and we figured out the land and stuff, she really didn't have any surface. A lot of it was just minerals. And so it was kind of a disappointment for them because they thought they had all this land, but they really didn't.
At the back of your book, the appeals process changed in 2023. So if the BIA makes a decision that you're not happy with, you can do an appeal. Yes, before we get to appeals, this is the provision that has been very controversial. This right here, this is the slide you need when you go to the BIA and you want to say, I want to know who owns that one tract of land over there because I might want to buy an interest or I might want to trade. This is the legal authority, and it's not a CFR provision. It's a United States Code statute. It's 25 U.S.C. 2216E. This allows you to go in and get the owner's name, mailing address, percentage of their interest in the trust land, location of the parcel, and it can be requested by any of the other owners on the reservation in that tract. or it can be requested by the tribe, or any person that is leasing, using, or consolidating, or is applying to lease, use, or consolidate that land. So this opens those trust land records to anybody that is wanting to use them, lease them, buy them, whatever that might be. So a lot of times we have landowners that say, gosh, I went in to find out who owns this land next to me so I can deal with them. And they'll say, oh, that's private information, you can't have it. No, this is the provision that you can use. It does say you have to put it in writing. So if you want to know about certain tracts, you need to do some written letter and say, I want information on these tracts. So that's how you would do that. Okay, then the last thing we want to talk about is the appeal rules have changed. When the BIA does something that you are not happy with, first of all, you need to have it in writing from the BIA, and then you can appeal it. And all those rules and how to do that are at the back of the book. So with that, I know everybody's getting sleepy. So I want to thank you all, yes? I actually couldn't find one. I tried to find one online. There are lots of helpful materials. Indian Land Tenure Foundation did a booklet, and yes,
There is, I can't remember what it's called, but it'll show up as like the second or third one on there. And it has, you can see one, like the original map that has all the allotments, but then you can see what's tribal land, what's allotted land, and like the numbers on it. So if you have your numbers, you can find out where it is. It's kind of a pain in the butt. You got to know about where it is and then look through all of them. But it's a really good resource.
Yeah, so the Indian Land Tenure Foundation did do a handbook for the Oglala Sioux tribe in specific, and it does have multiple pages. And we can try to find that link and have the legal office have it so you can get it, but it's online, and it goes through that TSR and how to find it on the map. It's like several pages of that.
okay. Well, thank all of you. Thank all of you for being here, and I'm hoping that this was helpful. Okay. Thanks.